The space station floated in the darkness between stars like a metal flower waiting to bloom. Relay Station Theta 7 was home to thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds, and Lieutenant had been living there for exactly 93 days. She stood at the observation window on the upper deck, watching the alien bazaar spread out below her like a living painting. The market was always busy at this hour. Merchants called out prices in languages that her translator chip struggled to keep up with. Customers moved between stalls selling everything from glowing fruits to machines that could fold space itself. Pressed her hand against the cold glass and smiled. Even after 3 months, she still felt like a child seeing snow for the first time. The galaxy was so much bigger than Earth had ever prepared her for. A group of walked past a food stall below. They were tall beings, almost 3 meters high, with skin that looked like living crystal. When light hit them at certain angles, they sparkled like diamonds. They moved with careful grace, never touching each other, never touching anyone else. Behind them came a family of bris. The insect-like creatures clicked and buzzed as they examined a display of fabric. Their compound eyes reflected hundreds of tiny images of the world around them. A young bris reached toward a piece of blue cloth, and its parent quickly pulled its arm back. No touching. Not in public, not between strangers. Had learned this lesson in her first week on the station. She had tried to shake hands with a trader, the way humans always greeted each other. The furry alien had jumped back as if she had tried to bite him. Her supervisor had pulled her aside afterward and explained things very clearly. Physical contact between species was considered primitive, uncivilized, a leftover behavior from ancient times when beings were still animals. The advanced civilizations of the galaxy had moved beyond such things thousands of years ago. They communicated with words and gestures. They traded goods and services, but they did not touch. Found this incredibly sad. On Earth, humans touched all the time. Mothers held their bobbies. Friends hugged when they met. Doctors placed comforting hands on their patients' shoulders. A touch could say, "I am here," or "You are not alone," or "Everything will be okay," in ways that words could never match. Here on the station had learned to keep her hands at her sides. She nodded instead of waving. She bowed slightly instead of reaching out. It felt wrong, like wearing shoes on the wrong feet, but she was a guest in this galaxy. She had to follow its rules. Her communicator beeped, and she heard Doctor's voice. "Are you still at the observation deck? Your shift starts in 30 minutes. "I know," she replied. "I'm just watching the market. It's peaceful up here." Laughed softly. "You and your people watching. One day you'll learn that aliens are just as boring as humans when you look at them long enough." Never said, "Every day I see something new." She was about to turn away from the window when movement caught her eye. Near the central fountain of the bazaar, a small figure sat alone on the ground. It was a cub, young enough that its silver-blue fur still had the soft fluffiness of childhood. The cub was small, reaching only up to its waist, and it sat with its back against the fountain's base. Something was wrong with its left paw. Leaned closer to the glass, her breath fogging the surface. The cub's paw was wrapped in some kind of medical binding, white fabric wound around from the wrist to the fingers, but the binding had come loose. One end dragged on the ground, picking up dirt and dust from the busy market floor. The cub tried to fix the bandage with its teeth. It grabbed the loose end and pulled, but this only made things worse. The wrap unwound further, revealing swollen pink skin beneath the fur. The cub let out a small sound of frustration and tried again. His heart began to beat faster. Where was the cub's mother? Where was its family? She scanned the crowd around the fountain. Hundreds of beings moved past the small. A merchant stepped over the trailing bandage without looking down. Two bris stood nearby, their many eyes fixed on the cub, but they made no move to help. A group of beings didn't recognize walked past, their conversation never pausing. No one stopped. The cub tried once more to fix its bandage. This time, the entire wrap came loose and fell to the ground. The cub picked it up and stared at the dirty fabric, then at its exposed paw. Its shoulders began to shake. It was crying. Felt something twist in her chest. The feeling was old and familiar, something that lived in every human heart. It was the feeling that came when you saw someone hurting and knew you could help. It was the feeling that said do something in a voice that would not be ignored. She watched the bazaar below. Dozens of beings passed the crying cub. Some glanced at it. Some looked away quickly. None of them stopped. None of them knelt down. None of them reached out. How could they just walk past? How could they see a child in pain and do nothing? Pressed her communicator. Are you near the observation feeds? Can you see the central fountain? There was a pause. Yes, I see it, the juvenile. Its bandage fell off. It's crying. No one is helping. The mother will return eventually. It's not our concern. But it's hurt and alone and scared. His voice became serious. Listen to me carefully. I know what you're thinking and you need to stop thinking it right now. Interfering with another species young is one of the most serious offenses in galactic law. You could cause a diplomatic incident. You could damage relations between Earth and the collective. You could end your career. Watch the cub wipe its eyes with its good paw. But someone should help. Someone will, its own people, when the mother returns. And until then, it just sits there suffering. That is how things work here. I don't make the rules. I just follow them, and so should you. Was quiet for a long moment. Below, the cub had given up trying to fix the bandage. It simply sat there, its injured paw resting on its lap, tears running down its furry face. The crowd continued to flow around it like water around a stone. In her mind saw a different image. A little girl on Earth sitting alone in a hospital waiting room, scared and hurting after a fall from a tree. Nurses walked past, busy with their duties. Doctors hurried by, focused on their patients. But then one woman had stopped. A stranger. She had knelt down, smiled gently, and asked if the little girl was okay. That woman had been the reason became a doctor, not because of some great medical technique, not because of any brilliant diagnosis, but because she had stopped, she had knelt, she had cared. The cub below looked up, and for one impossible moment felt like it was looking directly at her. Its eyes were large and wet with tears, and they held a question that needed no translation. Why won't anyone help me? Pulled away from the window, and began walking toward the lift that would take her down to the bazaar level. His voice came through her communicator. Where are you going? Answer me. She turned off her communicator. Some rules, she thought as the lift doors closed around her, were made to be broken. The lift moved slowly and had time to think about what she was doing. Too much time, perhaps. With each floor that passed, doubt crept into her mind like cold water seeping through cracks in a wall. What if was right? What if she was about to make a terrible mistake? She thought about the reports she had read before coming to the station. The galaxy was old. Civilizations had been traveling between stars for millions of years before humans discovered fire. In all that time, species had developed rules and customs that seemed strange to outsiders but made perfect sense to those who followed them. The rule against touching other species' children was not just a custom. It was law. The reasons were complicated. Long ago, before the Galactic Compact brought peace to the stars, species had done terrible things to each other's young. Wars had been fought. Entire worlds had burned. The law against interference was written in blood and pain, a promise that such horrors would never happen again. Understood this. She respected it even. But understanding and respecting did not stop her feet from moving toward the bazaar. The lift doors opened and noise washed over her like a wave. The market was louder down here, filled with the sounds of 100 languages mixing together. Smells hit her next, some pleasant, some strange, some that made her nose wrinkle. She stepped out into the crowd and began walking toward the central fountain. Beings moved around her, most of them taller than she was. Humans were not a large species by galactic standards. A could look down at her like she was a small child. Even the bris, with their bent legs and hunched bodies, often stood at her eye level. She passed a stall selling live animals in floating cages. Another stall offered jewelry made from compressed starlight. A third displayed weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Ignored them all. Her eyes were fixed on the fountain ahead. The crowd thinned as she approached the center of the bazaar. There, sitting exactly where she had seen it from above, was the cub. It was smaller than she had expected. Somehow, looking through the observation window had made the child seem bigger. Now, standing just a few meters away, she could see how young it truly was. Its fur was the color of a winter sky just before snow, and its eyes were large and golden, like coins made of sunlight. The cub did not notice her at first. It was staring at its injured paw, making small sounds of discomfort. The bandage lay in a dirty pile beside it, useless now. The paw itself was clearly swollen, the fur around the joint matted with something that might have been medicine or might have been blood. Took a step closer, then another. Around her, the crowd continued to move. She noticed that beings were keeping their distance from the cub, walking in wide circles to avoid coming too close. It was not unkindness exactly. It was simply the way things were done. The child was not their child. The problem was not their problem. A merchant passed nearby, its crystalline body chiming softly with each step. It glanced at the cub, then and something flickered in its many-faceted eyes. Warning, perhaps, or curiosity. Then it moved on, disappearing into the crowd. Two bris stood at a nearby stall, their compound eyes fixed on the scene. They did not pretend to look away. They watched openly, clicking to each other in their buzzing language. Translator Chip picked up fragments of their conversation. The human is approaching the young one. Humans are strange creatures. They do not understand proper behavior. Should we alert station security? Wait, let us see what it does. Felt their eyes on her like weights pressing against her skin. She felt other eyes too. Dozens of beings had stopped what they were doing to watch the human walking toward the cub. The bazaar had not fallen silent, not quite, but there was a tension in the air that had not been there before. She knelt down. The movement was simple, natural, the kind of thing she had done 1,000 times before. On Earth, adults knelt to speak with children all the time. It put them at the same level. It said, "I see you and you matter," without using any words at all. Here, in this alien market, the gesture seemed to carry more weight. She felt the crowd's attention sharpen, felt the silence spreading outward like ripples in water. The cub looked up at her. Its golden eyes were wet with tears, and its small body trembled slightly. This close could see the pain on its face, the confusion, the fear. It did not know who she was or why she was kneeling before it. It only knew that it was hurt and alone, and that no one had come to help. Until now. Tried to smile, but her heart was beating too fast. She was aware of every eye watching her, every translator chip recording her words. Whatever she did next would be seen by hundreds of beings. It would be reported, analyzed, discussed. It might shape how the galaxy saw humanity for generations to come. No pressure, she thought to herself, and almost laughed. "Hello," she said softly. Her translator chip would convert the words into the language, but she hoped her tone would carry meaning too. "My name is, I'm a doctor. Can I look at your paw?" The cub stared at her. It did not move, did not respond. Perhaps it was too scared. Perhaps it had never seen a human before. Had been told that humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, curiosities more than common visitors. She pointed at the cub's injured paw, then at her own hand, then back at the paw again. "It looks like it hurts. I can help. Will you let me help?" For a long moment, nothing happened. The cub simply looked at her with those large golden eyes and looked back. The noise of the bazaar faded away until there was only this small, furry child and the human woman kneeling before it. Then slowly, carefully, the cub extended its injured paw toward her. Felt tears prick at her own eyes. Such a simple gesture, such complete trust. This child did not know who she was or where she came from. It only knew that she had stopped, that she had knelt, that she had asked if she could help. And it had said yes. She reached out and gently took the small paw in her hands. The crowd gasped. The sound was loud enough to break through the market noise, a collective intake of breath from dozens of species. Heard clicks and whistles and growls of surprise. She heard translator Chip struggling to keep up with the sudden flood of chatter. The human touched the child. The human touched another species' child. Ignored them all. She had made her choice. Now she would see it through. She looked down at the small paw resting in her hands and felt the warmth of another living being against her skin. The fur was softer than she had expected, like touching a cloud that had somehow become solid. Beneath the fur, she could feel the bones and muscles and tendons, not so different from a human child's hand after all. The injury was worse than she had thought. Not just a sprain, but a fracture, small but real. The original bandage had been applied incorrectly, too tight in some places, too loose in others. No wonder it had fallen off. No wonder the cub was in pain. She looked up at the small face watching her with a mixture of hope and fear. "Don't worry," she said quietly. "I'm going to fix this. Everything is going to be okay." And in that moment, she believed it with all her heart. Reached for the medical kit at her belt. It was standard equipment for anyone in the United Earth Medical Corps, a small pouch no bigger than her hand that contained everything needed for basic emergency care. She had carried it every day since graduating from medical school, and she had used it hundreds of times on dozens of worlds. Never like this, though. Never while an entire alien bazaar watched in stunned silence. She opened the kit and pulled out a small bottle of cleaning solution. The liquid inside was designed to work on human skin, but the basic principles of medicine were the same across most species. Clean the wound. Stop any bleeding. Protect the injury from further harm. "This might sting a little," she told the cub, knowing her words would be translated, but hopping her gentle tone would carry its own meaning. "But I promise it will feel better soon." The cub watched her with wide eyes. It had stopped crying, though its small body still trembled slightly. Wondered when the last time was that someone had spoken to it with such softness. She wondered if anyone ever had. She poured a small amount of the cleaning solution onto a sterile cloth and began to gently wipe the area around the injury. The cub flinched at first, a small sound escaping its throat, but it did not pull away. Its golden eyes stayed fixed on its face, watching every movement she made. "You're being so brave," said. "Much braver than I would be. When I was your age, I cried every time I got even a small scratch." She was talking to fill the silence as much as anything else. The crowd around them had fallen almost completely quiet. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her every move, could hear the soft click of recording devices capturing the moment. Whatever happened here would be seen by millions, perhaps billions of beings across the galaxy. The thought made her hands want to shake. She did not let them. The wound was cleaner now, and she could see the injury more clearly. The fracture was in one of the small bones of the paw, what would be called a metacarpal in a human hand. It was not a serious break, but it needed to be immobilized properly or it would heal wrong. Pulled out a roll of bandaging material from her kit. The fabric was thin but strong, designed to hold its shape while allowing skin to breathe. She had used it countless times before, wrapping twisted ankles and sprained wrists and broken fingers. She began to wind the bandage around the cub's paw, working slowly and carefully. Her training had taught her to adjust her technique for different body types, and she applied that knowledge now. The paw was similar enough to a human hand that the basic approach would work, but she made small changes as she went. A little looser here where the fur was thickest. a little there where the bone needed the most support. "When I was young," she said as she worked, "I fell out of a tree and broke my arm. It hurt so much that I thought I would never stop crying. But a kind woman found me sitting alone in the hospital. She stayed with me until my parents arrived. She held my hand and told me stories about the stars." The cub made a soft sound, almost like a question, smiled. "She told me that the stars were watching over us, that even when we felt alone, there was light reaching down from a million suns, touching our skin, letting us know that the universe was full of wonders. I never forgot that. It's one of the reasons I became a doctor. I wanted to be that person for someone else. The one who stopped. The one who stayed." She finished wrapping the bandage and secured it with a small clip. The result was neat and clean, a proper medical binding that would support the injured bone while it healed. She examined her work critically, checking for any places where the wrap might be too tight or too loose. It was good. It was some of her best work, actually. Fear and the eyes of strangers had sharpened her focus rather than dulling it. "There," she said, releasing the paw gently. "All done. How does that feel?" The cub looked down at its newly wrapped paw. It flexed the digits experimentally, testing the bandage. The movement was small and careful, but could see that it came more easily now. The support of the proper wrapping was taking pressure off the fracture, reducing the pain. The cub looked back up at. Its golden eyes were still wet, but the tears were no longer flowing. Something had changed in its expression. The fear was fading, replaced by something else. Wonder, perhaps, or gratitude. Then it made a sound. The sound was unlike anything it heard before. It started low in the cub's chest and rose through its throat, a soft trilling purr that vibrated through the air. She could feel it in her bones, a sensation like warm sunlight spreading through her body. Her translator chip was silent. It had no words for what the cub was saying, but did not need words. Some things could not be spoken. They could only be felt. "Thank you," the sound said. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for stopping. Thank you for caring when no one else would." Felt tears building in her own eyes. She blinked them back and smiled at the small face looking up at her. "You're welcome," she whispered. The moment stretched between them, human and connected by something older and deeper than any law the galaxy had ever written. In that moment, there were no species, no rules, no boundaries. There was only one being helping another, the way it had always been, the way it was meant to be. Then the moment broke. A voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. Looked up to see an adult pushing through the crowd. The newcomer was female, taller than by half a meter, with fur the color of deep space and eyes that burned with barely contained emotion. The mother it had to be. The crowd parted before her like grass bending before a strong wind. Beings stepped back, giving her room, watching to see what would happen next. The tension in the air grew thick enough to taste. The mother stopped a few meters away from. Her eyes moved from the human to her child, taking in the scene. The bandaged paw, the kneeling position, the tears drying on small furry cheeks. Rose slowly to her feet. Her heart was pounding so hard that she could hear it in her ears. Every worst-case scenario she had imagined suddenly seemed possible. She thought of prison cells on alien worlds. She thought of diplomatic incidents and ruined careers. She thought of everything she might have just destroyed for the sake of one small act of kindness. The mother took a step forward, then another. Her eyes never left his face. "You," she said, and her voice was like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "You touched my child." Swallowed hard. "Yes, I did." The crowd held its breath. The mother stood before like a storm about to break. Her dark fur seemed to absorb the light around her, making her appear larger than she was. Her golden eyes, so like her child's but harder, more guarded, did not blink as she stared at the small human who had dared to touch her young. Forced herself to stand straight. Her hands wanted to shake, but she pressed them against her sides and held them still. She had known this moment would come. She had made her choice with full knowledge of the consequences. Now she would face them. "Your child was injured," she said, keeping her voice steady. "The bandage was dirty and falling off. I am a doctor. I only wanted to help." "You wanted to help," the mother repeated. Her translator gave the words a flat, mechanical quality, but underneath could hear something else, something she could not quite identify. "Yes." A human wanted to help a child. "Yes." The mother looked down at her cub. The small had not moved from its spot by the fountain. It sat there watching the two adults with wide, uncertain eyes. Its newly bandaged paw rested on its lap, clean and neat and properly supported. "Show me," the mother said. "Blink to what?" "Show me what you did. Show me the injury. Show me your work." For a moment, did not understand. Then she realized that the mother was not asking to see the bandage. She was asking to see how it had been applied. She was asking to see if this strange human had hurt her child or helped it. Knelt down beside the cub again. She was aware of the mother watching her every movement, aware of the crowd pressing closer to see. Carefully, she took the small paw in her hands and pointed to different parts of the bandage. "The injury is here," she said, indicating a spot on the back of the paw. "A small fracture in the bone. The original bandage was too tight here and too loose there. It was causing pressure in the wrong places and not providing enough support where it was needed." She traced the lines of her own work with a gentle finger. "I cleaned the area first to prevent infection. Then I wrapped it with the proper technique, tight enough to immobilize the fracture but loose enough to allow blood flow. The bandage should be changed every day and the injury checked for signs of healing. In about 2 weeks, the bone should be mended enough to remove the wrap entirely." The mother listened in silence. When finished, she reached down and took her child's paw herself. She examined the bandage carefully, touching it lightly, feeling the tension of the wrap at different points. A long moment passed. Then the mother looked at with eyes that had changed. The ice was still there, but beneath it was something warmer, something that might have been the beginning of respect. "You know what you are doing," she said. It was not a question. "I am a doctor," replied. "I have treated thousands of patients, different species, different injuries. Helping people is what I do." "Helping people." The mother repeated the phrase as if tasting something new. "Your species believes in this, helping those who are not your own kind." Thought about how to answer. The crowd was still watching, still listening. Whatever she said would be heard and remembered and passed on. She needed to choose her words carefully. But then she realized that careful words were not what this moment needed. This moment needed truth. "We do not see it that way," she said. "We do not divide the universe into our kind and other kinds. When we see someone suffering, we see a person who needs help. It does not matter what they look like or where they come from. A child is a child. Pain is pain. And kindness—" she paused, searching for the right words. "Kindness is the only language that every heart can understand." The mother was silent. Around them, the crowd was silent too. Even the normal noise of the bazaar seemed to have faded, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then the mother did something that made the crowd gasp once again. She reached out and placed her furred hand on top of. The touch was warm and soft, like being wrapped in velvet. Felt the gentle pressure of this palm against her skin, felt the slight trembling that betrayed emotions held tightly in check. This was not an attack. This was not an accusation. This was acknowledgement. "My name is," the mother said. "My daughter is called. We are in your debt, doctor." Felt tears threatening to spill again. "There is no debt. I only did what anyone should do." "But that is not true, is it?" His golden eyes were bright now, wet with unshed tears of her own. "Others were here before you. Others saw my daughter crying. Others watched her struggle with her bandage, saw her pain, heard her call for help, and they did nothing." She looked around at the crowd, at the hundreds of beings who had gathered to watch. Some of them looked away when her gaze passed over them. Others met her eyes briefly before turning aside. They did nothing, repeated, because it was not their concern, because the rules told them not to interfere, because caring for a stranger's child is primitive, uncivilized, beneath the dignity of advanced species. Her voice grew bitter. We tell ourselves that we have grown beyond such things, that we have evolved past the need for physical connection, for simple acts of kindness. But what have we really become? She turned back to, "You are the first person in my daughter's life who has shown her that strangers can be kind. The first person who has taught her that help can come from unexpected places. Do you understand what that means?" Shook her head slowly. "I'm not sure I do." "It means that you have changed her," said. "You have changed how she will see the universe for the rest of her life. You have shown her that somewhere in this cold, vast galaxy, there are beings who will stop for a crying child, beings who will kneel down, beings who will reach out. And that knowledge," she paused, her voice catching, "that knowledge is worth more than all the rules and laws and customs that have ever been written." The cub stood up from her spot by the fountain. She walked over to stand beside her mother, her small hand finding a larger one. Then she looked up at and made that sound again, that trilling purr that spoke of gratitude and wonder and something that might have been love. Knelt down one more time, bringing herself to the child's level. She looked into those golden eyes, so full of trust, and smiled. "You are going to be just fine," she said. "Take care of that paw and let your mother change the bandage every day. And remember," she reached out and gently touched the tip of his nose, "remember that you are never alone. Even when it feels like no one sees you, someone does. Even when it feels like no one cares, someone will. The universe is very big, but kindness makes it smaller. It connects us all, star to star, heart to heart. And as long as there is kindness, there is hope." Made a small sound, half purr and half giggle. Then she threw her arms around his neck and hugged her. The crowd watched in stunned silence as a human and a child embraced in the middle of the bazaar. No one moved. No one spoke. The moment seemed to last forever, stretching out like light across the darkness between stars. When they finally separated, saw that many beings in the crowd had wet eyes. Even the Stoics seemed moved, their crystalline faces catching the light in new patterns. The Brisk clicked softly to each other, their compound eyes reflecting hundreds of tiny images of the scene before them. Something had changed. Could feel it in the air like the first breath of spring after a long winter. The rules were still there, the laws still stood. But in this small space, in this brief moment, something older and more powerful had pushed through. Kindness, simple human kindness. And nothing in the galaxy would ever be quite the same again. The story spread faster than any ship could travel. Within hours, recordings of the incident had been shared across every communication network in the sector. Within days, it had reached the core worlds where the great powers of the galaxy made their homes. Within a week, there was not a single inhabited planet that had not heard of the human healer and the child. Learned of this slowly. For the first 3 days after the incident, she was confined to her quarters while station authorities decided what to do with her. The rules she had broken were serious. The laws were clear. Interfering with another species young was a crime that carried heavy penalties. Doctor visited her on the second day. He looked tired, as if he had not slept since she had turned off her communicator and walked into the bazaar. "You're famous," he said, sitting down across from her, "or infamous depending on who you ask. The human networks are calling you a hero. The council has filed a formal complaint. The Brisk Collective has requested a detailed report on human psychological profiles." He laughed, though there was no humor in it. "It's a mess, a complete mess." "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "But you did it anyway." "Yes, I did." Was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed and shook his head. "I've watched that recording 100 times, the crowd just standing there, all those beings doing nothing, and then you walking in like the rules didn't exist." He looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes. I keep asking myself what I would have done in your place. Would I have had the courage to break the rules, to risk everything for a child who wasn't even my own species? You would have said, "You're a good doctor." I'm a careful doctor, there's a difference. He stood up to leave, then paused at the door. Whatever happens next, I want you to know something. What you did was wrong by the laws of this station, but it was right by every measure that actually matters. Don't ever forget that. On the fourth day, was summoned to appear before the Galactic Council. The council chamber was vast, a circular room that could hold thousands of beings. Representatives from every major species sat in tiered galleries that rose toward a distant ceiling. At the center of the room was a single platform where those summoned to speak would stand. Walk to that platform alone. She wore her United Earth Medical Corps uniform, clean and pressed, the small emblem of Earth visible over her heart. She tried not to think about the millions of eyes watching her, the recording devices capturing every moment for broadcast across the galaxy. The high speaker rose from her seat. She was ancient, her crystalline body dulled by age but still beautiful in the way old things can be beautiful. When she spoke, her voice filled the chamber like music. Lieutenant of Earth, you have been brought before this council to answer for your actions on Relay Station Theta 7. You are accused of violating 17 protocols of conduct, including physical contact with a minor of another species and administration of medical care without diplomatic authorization. The High Speaker's many eyes fixed on. How do you respond to these charges? Took a deep breath. I did everything I am accused of doing. I make no attempt to deny it. A murmur ran through the chamber. The High Speaker raised a hand for silence. You admit your guilt. I admit my actions. Whether they constitute guilt depends on how guilt is defined. Explain. Looked around the vast chamber, at all the faces of all the species gathered to judge her. She thought about its golden eyes, about its warm hand on hers, about the small trilling purr that needed no translation. The laws I broke were created to protect children, she said. They were written because species once did terrible things to each other's young. I understand this. I respect this. But laws are not alive. They cannot see a crying child and feel their pain. They cannot weigh the cost of action against the cost of doing nothing. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When I saw sitting alone in that bazaar, I saw a child in need. Not a child, not an alien child, just a child. A small person who was hurting and scared and who had been taught by the silence of strangers that no one would help her, that no one cared. Her voice grew stronger. On my world we have a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. This means that children do not belong only to their parents, they belong to everyone. Every adult has a duty to protect them, to guide them, to help them when they fall. This is not just a law on Earth, it is who we are. It is written in our hearts. She looked directly at the High Speaker. I could not walk past that child. I could not pretend I did not see her. If that makes me guilty, then I accept my guilt. But I will never apologize for helping a child. Not ever. Not for any law in any galaxy. The chamber was silent. Then slowly, a figure rose from the section of the galleries. It was, and she was not alone. Stood beside her, her bandaged paw still visible, her golden eyes fixed on the human who had helped her. I wish to speak, said. The High Speaker nodded. The council recognizes the witness. Looked around the chamber, then down at her daughter. 10,000 years, she said. That is how long my people have traveled among the stars. In all that time, we have traded with 100 species. We have fought wars and made peace. We have learned their languages and their customs and their laws. But not once in 10,000 years has a member of another species knelt beside a child to ease their pain. She lifted up so the council could see her clearly. This is my daughter. She was alone and hurt and afraid. Hundreds of beings walked past her. Beings who could have helped but chose not to. Beings who let the rules tell them what their hearts should feel. Her voice cracked with emotion. And then a human stopped, a small, strange, soft-skinned being who had every reason to walk on by. She knelt down. She cleaned the wound. She wrapped the bandage. She spoke words of comfort to a child who could not even understand her language. Looked at across the vast chamber. The humans call this kindness. We had forgotten that such a word existed. We had convinced ourselves that touching is primitive, that caring is weakness, that the cold logic of laws is superior to the warm illogic of the heart. But this human showed us what we had lost. She lowered gently back to the ground. I do not speak only for myself. I speak for the collective. We request that all charges against Lieutenant be dropped, and we further request that humanity be recognized for what they truly are. And what is that? The High Speaker asked. Smiled the first smile had seen on her face. Healers, teachers, caretakers, a species that runs toward pain instead of away from it, a species that sees children not as possessions but as shared treasures, a species that reminds us all of what we used to be before we grew so old and cold and careful. One by one, other ambassadors rose. The Briss, a faction of the species that had never agreed on anything, began to speak, sharing stories of humans they had encountered, stories of human doctors treating enemy wounded, stories of human volunteers on disaster worlds, stories of humans running into danger for strangers, expecting nothing in return. The High Speaker listened to it all. When the last voice had fallen silent, she turned to with eyes that seemed to glow with inner light. It seems that humanity has reminded us of something we had forgotten, that laws exist to serve life, not the other way around, that children are the treasures of the universe, regardless of what species they belong to, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is kneel down and offer a hand. She struck her staff against the floor, the sound ringing through the chamber. All charges against Lieutenant are dismissed. Furthermore, by unanimous consent of this council, humanity is hereby granted full integration into the Galactic Compact, not as traitors, not as soldiers, but as what you have always been, the ones who stop, the ones who stay, the ones who care. Years later, when historians would write about this moment, they would call it the beginning of a new era. They would describe how humanity became the heart of the galaxy, teaching other species to touch again, to connect again, to remember what they had forgotten. But never thought about it that way. When she remembered that day, she remembered only a small cub with silver-blue fur and golden eyes, reaching out an injured paw toward a stranger. And the stranger who had chosen to reach back. That was the moment that changed the universe. Not a battle, not a treaty, not a great feat of technology or discovery. Just one person, one child, and a bandage wrapped with human kindness. It was enough. It would always be enough.